Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry, witamy serdecznie.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you heartily to the Freedom Games panel, how new technologies and support from technology companies have helped to maintain the continuity of the Ukrainian state and save Ukrainian heritage. My name is Maia Mazurkiewicz. I'm an expert on disinformation and behavioral change, but for the past 1.5 years, I've been dealing with Ukrainian issues and with aid to Ukraine and Ukrainians. And I look carefully at what has happened today, what's going on right now. We've got great panelists. Justyna Kopińska, journalist and sociologist. Witold Szabłowski, journalist and reporter, laureate of the EU Parliament award. Both of them have received a number of awards. Włodzimierz Bartczak, principal sales Amazon Web Services, and Włodzimierz Bartczak, vice president for OpenStreetMap Poland, mapping streets. So we're going to learn more about technologies and Ukraine. I think a lot has been going on there, but let's go back to February 24th, 2022, where we were on that day, even though there was already talk about impending war in Ukraine, many people warning about it. Nobody wanted to believe it, myself. And I woke up and I started to think and what I could do, started to act. I think that it was traumatic for everyone because we devoted our lives and hearts for those several months to aid. On one hand, from our empathy and love, but also we had some fear motivation. We were concerned that we would be next. Justyna, you went to Ukraine to report, to be there on the ground. Could you tell us about your first moments and your great courage to be there? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start with a research that I was fascinated by, a list of the happiest and least happy countries around the world. Among the happiest ones, Poland is missing, and Ukraine is not on the list of the most unhappy countries. Was studied was health, freedom, lack of corruption. In Poland, we have a great problem with social trust. Next to him, we have Siedlakowski and Sadura discussing. They wrote a book, Society of Populists. We can only trust our own family, and I think that Ukraine is not on the list of the unhappy countries, mostly due to trust. And going to Ukraine during the first month of war, I had an impression that never in my life had I seen such a united nation with a great sense of dignity and working for their country. And supporting each other's strong points mutually. When I came back to Poland, there was this great discussion about consumptionism, egoism from American intellectuals that today people don't think about the good of others, and I thought, okay, I think differently, I live in a different world, and I realized that this had to do that I spent my time in Ukraine in the first months, and the people were ready to offer everything to the army, to the state. They didn't think about the good of their families or themselves. They were ready to sacrifice everything for their compatriots. At that time, Kiev looked like a city from a science fiction movie. It was all in tremors, and the city was being bombarded. People lived in fear, and you could see fear in their eyes. Everyone was turning their homes and offices into places of giving aid to people. And it was immediately obvious that psychological need was there. Reverend Eric Salomon said that he's also a therapist. And since early in the morning till late at night, he was trying to help soldiers to go through this psychological stage of being able to kill another, the enemy soldiers. So look at these terrible moral dilemmas. A Catholic priest was helping soldiers to be ready to kill other soldiers. And he was encouraging to conduct supervisions so that psychologists from other countries in Europe would assist the Ukrainian colleagues. As I went in May to Ukraine, in Kharkiv, we met soldiers coming back home from the front line after 4 or 5 months of fighting. Their cognitive functions were completely altered, their memory altered, logical thinking altered. You could see it was very, very different. And as I talked to generals before, they had this ability to accept a huge amount of stress. They have psychological knowledge, how to accumulate, how to manage this. what to do in situations of danger. At the front line you can meet journalists, shoemakers, and people of different trades that do not know how to do this. And I think that Europe has a lot to do in this area to support Ukraine. Thank you very much for broaching this very important subject. Psychological hope is very important. Now, who of you has any contact with Ukrainians? Who was helping at the beginning of the war? And who has a thought about psychological help? Okay, great. So did we have quite a few people here? It's true, there's a lot of people with great trauma, some of them coming to us, many of them just fighting on the front line. Remember, over the first months I had a lot of friends in Ukraine. We were trying to provide psychological help. They refused. I think that another problem is a stigma attached to psychological help. Now, going back to what was there, Ukraine psychological help. As we talked before, Dadek, on the phone, you said everything started with people at Amazon who did a lot. They started to work. It was thanks to Polish people working for Amazon. Yes, indeed, Amazon Web Services.
And I'm really deeply moved when people approach me and they because there is one person from Mr. Buzek. He says, yes, okay, that's politics and we are technology, but whenever you buy anything on Amazon or you use online banking or Aviva, if you check results of the exam at the end of primary school or secondary school, that's all our part. On the 24th of February, when the first bombs fell, our employees started to help, of course, upon the approval of the company. Ukrainian ambassador approached us to help them protect registers and data. Well, of course, you don't think of it on everyday basis, but state cannot operate if it doesn't collect taxes or has the register of lands and so on. So that's where the state stops operating. So we started data migration that was done very slowly, but it was a very difficult task, and we were awarded by Minister Fedorov, and he said that our company AWS saved Ukraine. They can still collect taxes. School children can learn. Currently 45 institutions and ministries and 24 universities and over 100 smaller actors are operating because of our company. Coming back to psychologists, we were also approached by many foundations. There were many psychologists or psychotherapists who wanted to help, but we couldn't. It was very difficult to put it all together, but we managed to carry out a project where people could get connected through technology. This is how I met Wodek, who represents NGOs. an NGO. I would like to ask our audience whether you know what OpenStreetMap is. So OpenStreetMap is a kind of Wikipedia. We process information and data submitted by communities. This is quite a big project that covers all the world. We have representatives in all countries. I represent Poland. That's unknown to most people, but I think that all of us have used our data, because whoever uses Facebook and you can see a map or you navigate, this is our project. Well, all this data come from volunteers. So a day after the war started, people were calling me and asking, how can we help, what can we do? We work on maps. These are IT people, specialists in databases. So we started calling and asking how we can help, and it turned out that there was a problem with data. So GPSs had to be updated. We had to help people coming to Poland, not knowing any other language. They should be provided with a map, preferably in Ukrainian. So we called AWS. They said okay. And it happened so quickly. We were really shocked, because each corporation, each company has its own procedures, but we managed to do it very quickly. So we drew a map in Ukrainian with all points, which all centers and all places where people could get assistance. Also, a mapping point was established with the help of the Jagiellonian University, so they could learn where they can get legal assistance, but also psychological assistance. This map worked for 3 or 4 months. Then it was not necessary anymore, because people knew where to go. But at the very beginning, that was really very important, because our data from the map that you can use for the GPS, well, this data, the quality of this data was not very, very high at the eastern border. Over this first week, it was for the first time in my life when I was speaking to 3 telephones at the same time, and we were organizing help to people in Ukraine from RSM community. They didn't want their maps to be destroyed. We are still helping Ukrainians for the map to stay as it is, because they decided they don't want any changes. The buildings that were bombed, the museums which are no longer there, they are still there on the map. They don't want to help the Russians to show them what they have destroyed. So Ukraine is probably the only country in the world now where there are no amendments to the map, for that very reason. So for the first 2 weeks, people were calling each other. They couldn't sleep. I was trying to go to sleep for 2 hours, but I couldn't. Well, we were not on the front line. We were not driving there. We were not bringing people in, but we were helping with the provision of information, the provision of data, so that people could learn where they can get a prepaid card where they can get some assistance, where they can get legal assistance. Thank you very much. We can see how complex challenge it is, and how and what challenges the Ukrainians face to save their statehood. We have one platform. This is the psychological platform from which it all starts, and then these people with trauma and with problems, they have to run the country, and we don't even know about it. Well, OpenStreetMaps, I heard about it for the first time when we talked on the phone, even though it's developed in a way very similar to Wikipedia. And so, Vitek, and I'm now proud thinking of you, because when we speak of community and when we speak of the emotions that are there between our nations, our two nations, and emotions which were there at the moment of the when war began, and this war still is there, and our country has changed a lot because of that. But I read one of your interviews, and the woman that you were interviewing was telling a story about Poles and Ukrainians who would dance together, sing songs together, and who knew their myths and stories. What's your perspective on that? Because you've been examining this subject for quite a long time. You go to Ukraine, you speak to people living in the borderlands. It's incredible experience to listen to what you are saying, because they make a beautiful mosaic of these first days. Everybody experienced that in a different way. I was in the front line. I decided that I have too many friends in Ukraine. I've been going there for too long. This is the country that's the closest to my heart after Poland. So I decided not to pretend that I am a journalist. So I just went to the border. The war began on Thursday. And on Friday, I was there at the border. And there were mothers with children and elderly people. I can't remember what weather it was, whether it was very cold, or we were all in a way paralyzed. We were terrified with what Putin did. But at the same time, it was an incredible moment, because we were looking around, seeing how many of us there are, and new people were coming, and we were waiting for 2 or 3 hours to be of any use. So at the border points, there were thousands of cars waiting for these people, and that was the face of Poland, which I missed very much, because everybody had their share in this assistance, and this was an incredible human energy. We are to discuss new technologies, but I will just tell you that it would be really very difficult for us to coordinate it without these technologies. Well, I was a driver, so we could do it with the help of technology. I admired Ukrainians very much, because they had their groups on Telegram, and those who were crossing the border there had their route coordinated by people who were totally unknown to them. Well, there were some people who had friends or families, but there were Ukrainians in Kraków, in Przemyśl, in Rzeszów, and we were bringing these people there, and then this Ukrainian community in Poland, they were taking care of them. And you this quotation comes from Alexandra Wasyjko-Szura, a woman whose family was saving Poles in Wolin in Ukraine, and she was praying for peace between Poland and Ukraine. She was terrified with what happened between the two nations, so she prayed for the change in relations between our nations. And I brought her to Poland in June, and she's a very modest lady, and she said, maybe my prayers have come true. So it's an unusual time, very difficult time. Of course, we would like this reconciliation to take place for other reasons and under different circumstances, but I think that this will benefit both nations for years to come.
Pokazuje, że
Thank you very much, Witek. Yes, what you said, I think my prayers have come true. Indeed, each individual has contributed their thing, and without individual people, it wouldn't have been possible. So, Justyna, you mentioned politicians in Ukraine. You talked to Yulia Tymoshenko. You talked to politicians who were 60, 70 years old. They were able to leave Ukraine, but they didn't. They stayed on, and had they left, what would Ukraine would have been like? And indeed, thanks to that, the war didn't end in 3 days. Kiev was not taken. Yes, Klitschko brothers could have left for any place around the world they wished, and Volodymyr Zelensky got an offer from the United States, which he turned out in beautiful words. When I went to Kenya, close to Turkana Lake, and every girl said they wanted to be Michelle Obama, and in Ukraine, every boy would like to be either Zelensky or Klitschko. And when I talked to Vitaly, he talked about his love to his motherland in beautiful words. How a man perceives his motherland, his compatriots, and for him it's exactly the same responsibility as for his children. Not everyone knows that he's a boxer and politician. He holds a PhD degree, and he has many historical books in his office, and how to conduct political conversations. Similarly to Volodymyr Zelensky, he's really developing in that area. It's incredible for me how all those people, men and women, were able to withstand that pace of living. So many meetings, international meetings and political actions in their country. It's overwhelming for me. In the first months of war, what was incredible for me was the decisions of every person and let's say office workers and so on and so forth that said goodbye to their family members and went to the front lines. So the sacrifice for their own country was an honorable thing to do. It's the best word that comes to my mind. There's another issue that I'd like to mention is the ambivalence. When I went to eastern Ukraine, I remember the house of an elderly man where everything was destroyed. They also shot through his TV set. They destroyed all of his paintings. He was a collector of artworks, He just cut the electricity cord on his iron. In his house, animals lost limbs, like cows had only 3 legs. It was terrifying. He removed mines with a shovel. He said, "Oh, don't go behind the house because explosions all the time." And in his house, he had a book about Soviet heroes, and he said that before that he had a book stood on a shelf at the central place in his house. He always considered the Soviets as brothers, a very close nation, and he says he had very different feelings about them. And in Kharkov, for example, was a lady in the army, and they had she had very close relations in Russia. So some people don't know what to feel. Yes, indeed, so this statement is terrible. It sounds terrible. Some people don't know what to feel. In my case too, there are plenty of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, especially elderly people, and some people just stopped speaking Russian even at home because of the trauma. This war is going on. Of course, the war had been going on from 2014, but the level of atrocities changed tremendously when we talk about new technologies, and new technologies are connected to us, to our psyche. They support us as humans. What was noticeable for me myself when I went to Lviv in March, quite a lot. I spent nights there, also in bunkers. This application with bombing alarms. When I talked about what was going on, I got an application turned on, and indeed many people panicked, and it was difficult for myself as well, but people got used to it. But the first months were unimaginable. Had it not been for new technologies, we would have had only the sirens, and there would have been many more casualties. Yes, well, you cannot see this, but when Ukraine started cooperation with us, so it was like transitioning from an old to a new car. It was difficult to begin, but the Ukrainians were able to adapt very, very fast. I can't remember the name of the Ukrainian application. It's GIA, which is an equivalent of M-Citizen. They developed their citizen application to the extent that they started to offer this as a product for other countries. And before the war, they didn't know anything about it. They were not able to export data outside of Ukraine, so they didn't have access to any cloud services. And I think now we have a decree stating that data may remain outside of Ukraine up to 2 years after the end of the war. But it is little said that the conflict has destroyed a lot of cultural objects, legacy, especially all those large museums were evacuated, but small institutions weren't, especially in Eastern Europe. And Save Ukrainian Heritage Online, that's a special initiative. Several people got together and they obtained let's say information from those institutions. For example, they say transferred or information. They say stored information or saved information, uploaded to the cloud, and the next day the server didn't exist because let's say the local servers were destroyed or stolen. I think about 5,000 pages and images have been saved, and right now it's an work going on to prepare an online gallery from those artworks. It's an open project. It's an interesting initiative. This is very important because new technologies can save cultural legacy. It's not anything new. Culture has always been one of the major victims during wars. The aggressors wanted to destroy even the Second World War. Hitler stole thousands of artworks from Poland. Many of them have not been recovered yet. Włodek, you said that you cannot offer you mapping services in Ukraine, but can you see any possibilities of your organization supporting the restoration of cultural heritage in the future? You know that many artworks are already outside of Ukraine. Have you given this any thought?
Talks are going on, but they are difficult because we cannot do anything until the war ends. And on the other hand, saying to our Ukrainian friends, well, we will help you, but when the war ends, doesn't sound good. Today, when I talked to them before this panel, I suggested that there is maybe something that I should say or draw attention to, but to them, to people living with data. Because most people engaged in OpenStreetMap are people working with databases. They say that to them, it's the most scary to realize how much of their cultural heritage they have already lost. Today, they just record them or store them on disks, and they can't do anything else with it, because any data that we place that we put on the map, it will immediately be on the Russian servers. We cannot physically block it, even though if you have a strictly Russian server, OSM cannot be read. I don't know why, but it's easy to circumvent it. You can buy a service if you have IP in Russia through a server in the United States or Bahamas. So today we are trying to act as policemen. There were attempts where certain locations were placed on the OpenStreetMap. That goes on happening all the time. But at the very beginning of war, what helped us was the fact that we knew each other already at that time. because the question of trust was there. People wanted to know who they talk to. We in the OSM, we know each other. Everyone who knows the system may go on my account and see its back track history until 2017. So this trust was built very quickly, and we coordinated a lot from the very beginning. I was talking to Andrzej, who I had never met before, but we could trace our histories, so that was very helpful. And we are trying to help them in not giving any strategic information on the map. So this trust, yes, but speaking of the future, many people are trained in new technologies. Most technological companies need people, and those who left Ukraine or stayed in Ukraine, they also need to be retrained. The several thousand people were trained. We had a project. They took part in a 12-week training. But the flexibility of this nation is incredible to me. It's also incredible, speaking of fighting disinformation. Russian disinformation was very visible in Ukraine. They want to destabilize and polarize the society. And currently there are many companies and organizations which counteract disinformation. They develop technologies in this area, and of course it's all based on trust. And Vitek, coming back to new technologies, because I wanted to give some time to the audience for questions. Vitek, you also told me about a very interesting new technology event that you witnessed. Well, I want this bloody war to end, and I'm really fascinated to see what the reconstruction of Ukraine will look like. Well, everybody is showing now a new munition, new armaments that they have. The West is showing their arms, but then the time will come for technology competition. In Lviv, I saw a school that was built with the help of 3D printer. I saw it on Ukrainian media. I went to the building site, a Norwegian company which can do it. They brought together, they collected money from among their staff and from donors who wanted to help Ukraine. This school is very much needed because normal school in Lviv suddenly has got twice as many children as they used to have. So, and normally under normal conditions they would build this school for 2 years, and there was a
Potem to schło przez miesiąc, a potem to wytynkowało.
a bulldozer came and they put all the installations, and it took them 3 months, and they want to build other schools in the same way. And when reconstruction time comes, they will be building these schools in thousands. So I'm really looking forward to this moment when Ukraine starts its reconstruction. So I'm sure that this will be the first place in the 21st century to be reconstructed after such terrible damage, but also using the 21st century technology. When this horrible war ends, yes, that's lovely. That's also very good that they start with schools, because they take great care of their children at the very beginning of the war. the Russians transported thousands, hundreds of thousands of children, especially from eastern Ukraine. So they want to reconstruct Ukraine in terms of structures, cities. But they also want to reconstruct their nation. And now I'd like to give the floor to the audience. I'm sure you have many interesting questions. There is a mic that you will get to ask a question.
Bardzo dziękuję. Ja nazywam się Marcin Sulikowski.
Yeah, thank you. Marcin Sulikowski. I have two questions, one more general to everyone, and the other one to the gentleman representing Amazon Web Services. Let me start with a general question. I agree with you that we are looking forward to new fascinating events in Ukraine. Let the war finish as soon as possible, but in every kind of business, especially digital business, there must be a coincidence of certain factors occurring together for success. There must be some compelling event and adoption. In the case of Ukraine, a compelling event was war, and what you're mentioning, adoption of digital solutions, which are often the only possibility for Ukrainian society to maintain a continuity of communication relations with state institutions. Would you agree with my thesis that in the coming decade, Ukraine is going to be a European pioneer in terms of digital innovation, in terms of state citizen communications? And second question focused on cloud technologies. Now, you mentioned that Zelensky's decree really waived a prohibition of the use of cloud technologies rather than wide agreement or permission to use them. So do you think that in the future Ukraine will pioneer or will widely adopt cloud technologies? Any other questions? Okay, two more questions. Tomasz Majski, I have one question. Fortunately, I haven't been present from the very beginning, but there is an application that I saw in Kharkiv that helps soldiers with maintaining psychological, say, balance with self-diagnosis and support. I'd like to ask you whether any people from Poland participated in the development of that application, to the best of your knowledge, or do you think this could be transferred to Poland, where we have problems with the availability of psychiatrists? Now, my question is for the gentleman from Amazon Web Services. I'm just wondering whether such an extreme event like a war in Ukraine is a source of technological inspirations. Is it something that you can use to develop your structure in the future? Many thanks. We have several questions, so I would like to start addressing the questions. Okay, I think the questions were addressed to Dariusz primarily, so maybe he should start. So, let's start with Zelensky's decree. Now, there are two certain things in life, death and taxes. we cannot be sure what will happen after the war. Today, it's difficult to imagine that we'll go back to status quo. Of course, some things will be migrated back to local server rooms. Some solutions will stay with us, some will be transferred to other cloud providers, but I cannot imagine backpedaling totally. But the situation is very similar in Eastern Europe and Europe in general. We can see greater interest in cloud services than before March 2022 as a safer solution. Yes, yes, but generally it's a solution that can withstand major DDoS attacks, that can ensure the continuity of operation of private and public institutions in the case of major defects or destruction of data centers, not only kinetic attacks but also natural disasters. So you can see what's going on around the world, storms and floods and the temperatures affecting the grid. So there are a lot of factors that increase the attractiveness of cloud services to public and private institutions and organizations. And there's another question about application. Fortunately, I do not know this application, but we're a little bit like a provider of bricks for a house. So it's possible that somebody has built that house from our bricks, but this is associated with the first question: to what extent institutions will be flexible in their approach to cloud solutions. As far as the last question goes, I don't think we haven't developed new solutions. We are following the same patterns to make sure natural disasters do not affect our services. I don't know. I'm not aware of any major change in the wake of the war. So the applications used by the government, it's exactly the same infrastructure used by all other institutions. So if you open an account on AWS, you'll get the same application, the same virtual machines, same technologies as a British postal service, Deutsche Bahn, or LOT in Poland. It shows the democratization of IT. When I opened the first small internet store 20 years ago, it was a huge amount of knowledge. Today, anyone can open a e-commerce store using cloud solutions. Okay, so last question for everyone. So what's going to be the impact of what's going on in Ukraine internationally? Now, war in Ukraine is going to push borders. Now, these technologies were available before the war in terms of the weather or earthquakes, as in Morocco. Well, solutions were there, but they were not used on a wide scale, such as pandemic has pushed borders in terms of what we can do remotely. Similarly, the war in Ukraine has pushed borders in terms of how technology is perceived. Technology itself has not changed, but something kind of caught on in our heads that, okay, we can help in this way, we can deliver products, we can provide aid in this way, we can communicate with people at the end of the world and so on. soon after the war broke out, I went to a meeting, 8 or 9 people, each in different countries, some on different continents, so we cannot suddenly stop this and say, okay, we cannot have teleconferences like that. So these are the boundaries that have been pushed, new technologies that have changed Ukraine and the world. Justyna, Witek, a minute. I'm interested in technology in terms of journalism and law enforcement. I'm very much interested in how Ukraine can gather data about the number of rapes, for example, and the faces of the perpetrators. Or perhaps it would be like in the case of other wars where sexual offenders were not persecuted. We could immediately see pictures from Bucha of bodies of inhabitants, also what you mentioned in terms of the kidnapping of Ukrainian children and taking them to Russia. And I saw images from Russia, and they were able to show that in Russia thanks to technology. For me, it is amazing to see a post-Soviet country that was not able to get out of that circle. It's amazing to see how fast Ukraine adopted to 21st century, the transition from the country of the past, which on the one hand was in the 21st century, but it was deeply rooted in a Soviet reality. But this technological leap, the pace of learning, the learning trajectory is amazing. Recently, my colleague who works with you, if you can say that you can get married via technology, so you cannot get a divorce, but you can get married. So you can see the huge development. Okay, every crisis leads to something new. Let's hope this terrible war ends as soon as possible, that we can draw some important lessons for Ukraine and the world. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Dzień dobry. To znaczy, myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co? Ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty. W urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez PiS-u.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihrer Ausreise.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem. Zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się